Have you ever felt a promise so powerful it could reshape your destiny from the dust beneath your feet to the vast expanse of the sky? Imagine Miriam, a villager in ancient Canaan, watching her sheep graze as the sunrise gilds olive groves, each dawn reminding her that life's greatest trials often precede its most profound blessings. Now picture yourself standing on those same windswept hills, heart heavy with questions about purpose and belonging. Could there be a divine design guiding you through every struggle you face? From the moment Abraham first pressed his staff into parched earth, a sacred covenant was set in motion, a purpose greater than any fortress or border, calling countless generations toward a promise written in bones and breath. As you step into this story, know that you're not merely an observer but a participant on the brink of something extraordinary. Expect to witness transformations that echo through centuries, where brokenness gives way to renewal and exile yields to homecoming. If you're ready to explore how an ancient vow can ignite hope in your own life, share your thoughts below and join the conversation. Now, let us transition from this threshold of wonder and uncover the first chapter of a journey that will challenge, inspire, and ultimately change everything. Before there were borders, there was a promise. A pale moon hovers above undulating hills dappled with olive trees. The night air trembles with insects' chorus, and the scent of fig blossoms drifts across the landscape like a whispered secret. In this silence, the land itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for a story to unfold. Imagine standing on those same stones, where no wall yet cleaved earth from earth, where desert dust held the footprints of shepherds and patriarchs long before any army ever marched. Could it be that beneath your feet lies the origin of a conflict etched into the world's memory? The story begins with one man, Abraham, called from Ur's bustling streets to a land he could only glimpse in vision. In Genesis 12 verses 1-3, the voice of God spoke across his tent flap, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation and I will bless you." Those words were at once thunder and caress. They shaped destiny as sure as any chisel carved stone. Dust became covenant, promise gathered like dawn over the horizon. Abraham pressed his staff into parched soil and built altars of rough stone, each pile of rocks a heartbeat of faith. Did he know that his descendants would still carry those stones, literal and metaphorical, across deserts and centuries? Time unfurled like a scroll, and Abraham's children multiplied. Isaac laughed in the cradle, and Ishmael's cries echoed in the wilderness of Paran. Two lines of descent spread like roots in different directions, yet both drew life from the same wellspring of promise. The sands shifted, empires rose and crumbled, and the memory of covenant endured. In Genesis 15 verses 18-21, the borders of promise were traced from Egypt's river to the Euphrates, a breathless expanse of land destined to witness both blessing and heartbreak. Could land itself bear witness to vows spoken under starlit skies? Centuries later, beneath Sinai's stormlit summit, Moses beheld a burning bush that blazed without consumption. His heart pounded as God revealed his name, "I am who I am." In Exodus 3 verses 14-15, Moses was told to speak to his people Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That sacred name carried ancestral echoes deeper than any well. It bound past to present in a single utterance. Imagine the Israelites huddled around Sinai's glow, tents ringed with worship, as the thunder of tablets carved in stone rolled through the night air. Dust and breath, law and life, fused in that moment, bones rising again under covenant's call. The promised land lay ahead like a tapestry yet to be woven. Joshua led the people across the Jordan's floodwaters, which parted at his word, leaving a path of promise in liquid mirror. At Gilgal, 12 stones were set as silent sentinels, each rock a testament, witness to passage, witness to promise. The hills of Jericho trembled at the sound of trumpets until walls collapsed into rubble. Could music and faith breach barriers that armies could not? As Israel's tribes settled in the land, the promise took on flesh in kings and prophets. David danced beneath Jerusalem's walls, the Ark of Covenant coursing through city streets like a living flame. Solomon built a temple of cedar and gold where incense rose in fragrant plumes. Yet the land's heartbeat quickened with tensions unseen, tribal rivalries, prophetic warnings, and the tension between human ambition and divine mandate. Prophets spoke of exile yet also of return. Ezekiel beheld valleys of dry bones and heard God command, "Prophesy to these bones that they may live." In Ezekiel 37 verses 5-6, breath returned to lifeless dust, bones rising again. Could broken people ever be reshaped into a living nation? Then came exile's long shadow. Babylon's king marched into Jerusalem, his armies burning temple and city alike. The survivors trudged toward foreign rivers, hearts heavy as ash. Yet even ashes held promise of breath. In distant lands, the exiles lifted their voices toward Zion, tears watering the seeds of future return. When Cyrus the Persian spoke liberty, the exiles turned homeward, rebuilding temple and walls amid scoffing neighbors. Could hope endure through generations of displacement and longing? Tonight, the hills of modern Israel and Palestine pulse with life and memory alike. Cities glow where ancient caravans once camped. Roads hum with traffic where David's chariots thundered. The land still hears footsteps, millions of them treading paths of prayer, protest, and pilgrimage. Keys that no longer fit any lock are still clutched with hope. Olive trees stand witness to defeat and rebirth in the same breath. Could two peoples bound by a single promise ever learn to share these hills and valleys without drawing lines of division in the soil itself? As the moon dips below the eastern ridge, the wind stirs olive leaves like whispered prayers. Beneath their rustle lies the echo of Abraham's vow, Moses' tablets, Joshua's stones, and Ezekiel's bones. A covenant older than empires weaves beneath every foundation and checkpoint. And so stands the world at the threshold of history's first act, a land of promise and dust, of covenant and conflict. How will the next pages unfold? Will promise outlast the scars of division? Or will this ancient vow, written in bone and breath, guide the hearts of all who tread these hills toward a future still unwritten? A low sun gilds the newly risen Second Temple with rose-gold light, its polished stones shimmering like the scales of a giant serpent coiled in prayer. Pilgrims pour through Jerusalem's gates, their tunics dust-stained yet bright with anticipation. In the air, the aroma of frankincense and burnt offerings mingles with the laughter of children chasing pigeons along the colonnaded courts. Could it be that a people long scattered would now stand united beneath this sacred roof, their covenant reborn in stone and sacrifice? This was the world of the Second Temple period, a time when empires clashed and the land itself became a bridge between cultures. Alexander the Great's army swept in from the west in 332 BCE, their thunderous charge heralding a new Hellenistic age. Greek became the language of commerce and philosophy. Gymnasia arose where priests once offered incense. Under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the temple courtyards were defiled by foreign altars to Zeus. Yet from that desecration sprung the Maccabean revolt. In 164 BCE, Judas Maccabeus and his ragged band of rebels stormed the citadel, reclaimed the altar, and lit lamps that burned for 8 miraculous nights. Hanukkah's flickering flames became a motif of hope, ashes and breath stirring together in defiance of erasure. Could a single clay lamp defy the might of empires? For generations the Hasmonean kingdom strove to forge a national identity out of dust and promise. Gardens were terraced on rocky hills, coins minted with the image of ancient symbols, and priests taught ritual law in every village. Yet internal strife and external pressures left the land vulnerable. In 63 BCE, Pompey's legions marched through the temple courts, their banners snapping in the wind like thunderclaps. Roman rule settled across Judea like a vast, unyielding stone slab. Could a people bound by covenant withstand the tread of legions they did not invite? Herod the Great emerged from this crucible, a client king with Roman gold in one hand and Jewish piety in the other. He rebuilt the temple on a scale that dwarfed Solomon's, stacking gleaming walls upon ancient foundations. Marble staircases led to courts hung with tapestries of gold and purple. Pilgrims gasped at the sight, promise made tangible in rock and mortar. Yet Herod's reign bore the tension of ambition and fear. In his palace corridors, shadows whispered of waiting heirs and secret plots. Could a monument to faith stand firm when its architect trembled on the edge of paranoia? In that same city walked a figure whose voice would kindle a different kind of revolution. The Gospels tell us of a carpenter's son who spoke of mustard seeds growing into mighty trees and of living waters springing from dusty hearts. He healed the sick beneath the temple's soaring arches, his words drifting through columns like sacred smoke. "Blessed are the peacemakers," he said, tilting his head toward frail hands outstretched in supplication. In his teachings, covenant became not a nation of stone but a people of compassion. Could divine promise bend the arc of human hearts toward mercy? Yet the temple's grandeur and the promise of a kingdom met a cross carved outside its gates. In the hush before dawn, an empty tomb whispered of breath returning to bone. "He is not here, for he has risen," the angel declared in Matthew 28 verse 6. Bones rising again, not only for Israel but for every nation that longed to step from death into life. Could resurrection forge a bridge across centuries of dust and exile? Roman governors treaded the streets beneath aqueducts that carried water from distant hills. Sanhedrins clashed with centurions, and priests negotiated with procurators over pilgrimage taxes. Tensions rippled through crowded marketplaces, where vendors hawked dates and olives beneath portraits of Caesar. Then came the fateful year of 70 CE. Vespasian's legions encircled Jerusalem, siege towers casting long shadows at sunset. The ground shook with battering rams, and the air filled with screams and dust. When the temple gates finally fell, fire consumed cedar and gold alike. The Holy of Holies, that inmost sanctuary, vanished in a pillar of smoke. Could a people's heart remain beating when its sacred center lay in ashes? The survivors fled through shattered streets, clutching Torah scrolls to their chests. Refugees poured into Galilee, into the hills of Predates, and into every port along the Mediterranean. Each carried a trowel or a remnant of mosaic, seeds of memory sown in every village they touched. A new covenant emerged among them. Synagogues rose as rough-hewn altars, Torah became the compass of exile, and prayer replaced sacrifice. In the valley of dry bones, Ezekiel's words took flesh once more. "I will make breath enter you and you shall live." Ezekiel 37 verse 5. Could exile itself become the cradle of renewal? By the end of the 1st century, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai secured permission from Vespasian to found a center of learning in Yavne. There, the Pharisees shaped oral law into Mishnah, binding scattered communities with shared practice. Scholars debated prophecy beneath olive trees, their voices rising like incense. Could covenant transcend temple and land, living instead in words and ritual handed from teacher to student? As the centuries turned, dusty roads carried rabbis to Babylon and Spain, where the Talmud took shape. Jews built communities in Alexandria's libraries and Carthage's ports. They spoke Aramaic, Greek, Latin. Every tongue became a thread in covenant's tapestry. Could a promise born in Canaan stretch across seas and stand the test of diaspora? Under Byzantine banners, churches rose in Jerusalem, echoing domes of gold reflecting Christ's resurrection. Yet Jews still prayed at the Western Wall, fingers tracing grooves in ancient stone. Bones rising again echoed not only in Christian hymns but in the hearts of those who still remembered covenant's earliest chords. Could hope endure when every empire claimed to bear divine favor? This was an era when prophets spoke of a time when swords would be beaten into plowshares and nations would neither learn war nor raise shields again. Could such visions leap from scrolls to reality in a world ruled by Caesars and crowned by bishops? As pilgrims from distant lands knelt on stone pavements, their whispered prayers mingled with the wind. The hills themselves seemed to hum with anticipation for a promise yet unfulfilled. And so the Second Temple era drew to a close in tragedy and transformation. Promise and dust, witness and exile, ashes and breath, motifs woven into every generation's tapestry. The land lay silent under foreign flags even as hearts across the earth beat with covenant's echo. Could this ancient drama find its way back to the promised hills? Or would the scars of destruction forever shape the destinies of those who claimed Abraham as father? As night falls once more over undulating hills, the stars blink in patterns unchanged by conquest or crusade. Each light is a witness to covenant's vast expanse. And in the hush between breaths, one question lingers like incense. Will the promise spoken beneath Sinai's flame yet guide the footsteps of a people scattered across the world back to the land of their ancestors? A crimson dawn spills across terraced vineyards clinging to limestone hills, the first light glinting off minarets and church spires alike. Markets awaken with the clatter of pottery and the scent of spiced coffee, while narrow alleyways in Old City Jerusalem hum with footsteps tracing ancient cobblestones. Here, beneath the same sky that once ignited Sinai's fire and echoed Joshua's trumpets, converge the fates of three peoples, each bound to covenant, each bearing memories of promise and exile. Could a land haunted by millennia of bones rising again find peace amid competing prayers? Centuries passed as Roman legions withdrew and new banners rose in their place. In 614 CE, Persian forces poured through the Lion's Gate, only to be driven out days later amid tales of miraculous deliverance. Christian pilgrims whispered of the Mother of God's protection, while rabbinic sages recorded that hidden scrolls of Torah had been saved from destruction. Dust and breath intertwined as empires traded dominion like shifting winds. Who were the witnesses in those days? The mosaics in Golgotha, the arches of Hezekiah's tunnel, the ancient sycamore by Zacchaeus' side, as prophets and pilgrims alike claimed covenant's heritage. Then in 638 CE, Arab armies under Caliph Umar entered Jerusalem on foot, reverently passing the keys of the city into Muslim hands. As the Dome of the Rock rose aloft its golden dome, Muslims spoke of Muhammad's night journey and ascension upon the Temple Mount. Their prayers mingled with Hebrew psalms at the Western Wall and with Christian hymns at Golgotha's shrine. Could covenant's promise stretch beyond Abraham's line to cradle all who heard the one's name beneath the olive boughs? Under Umayyad and Abbasid rule, the land became a crossroads of trade and theology. Caravanserais dotted desert roads where Bedouin once tended flocks. Scribes translated Greek philosophy into Arabic in bustling courts at Ramla and Ramallah. Dusty scrolls of prophecy lay beside Quranic manuscripts in libraries that hummed with scholarship. Yet even as knowledge bloomed, the land's heartbeat remained rooted in covenant. Prophecies of exile and return whispered in every corner. Could the words of Isaiah 44 verse 28 still stir hope that Cyrus from the east would yet appear? By the 12th century, the Crusader banners fluttered across coastal castles. Knights in chainmail rode through Sharon's plain, their trumpets echoing against cathedral walls. They called this Terra Sancta a recovery of lost promise, yet their rule brought blood beneath the stones stained by countless sacrifices. In 1187, Saladin's forces reclaimed Jerusalem, his banner raised over Al-Aqsa as tears mingled with dust. Could the promise of gentleness withstand the scars left by cross and crescent alike? For 500 years the Ottomans reigned, their sultans called to prayer filling dawn's hush, synagogues lighting Shabbat candles at dusk, churches tolling bells in the deepening twilight. The land lay relatively quiet beneath their administration. Olive oil flowed from Acre's presses, cotton from Rammel's fields, and pilgrims from afar threaded through Jaffa's gate. Promise, dust, return, witness, each motif wove beneath Ottoman tents. Could a stable empire finally soothe echoes of exile? Yet beneath this calm, surges of modernity stirred restless souls. In the 19th century, European explorers unearthed Dead Sea Scrolls, biblical archaeology sprang to life, and Christian missionaries established schools and hospitals. Jewish thinkers in Warsaw and Vilnius dreamed of return as pogroms stained Europe's nights with ash. Theodor Herzl penned The Jewish State in 1896, his words falling upon weary ears. If you will it, it is no dream. Could a dream born in distant salons find soil in Canaan's hills? Simultaneously, Arab intellectuals gathered in Beirut's coffee houses, debating self-determination and national identity. They traced their lineage to Ishmael's line or to ancient Canaanite clans, invoking the land of Canaan as their ancestral cradle. Newspapers printed in Arabic circulated from Jerusalem to Cairo, calling on Arabs to rise from dust and claim their own destiny. Could two awakening nations spring from the same well of promise? As the Ottoman twilight deepened, fissures appeared in the empire's foundations. Young Turks sought reform yet drew lines that split communities. In Jerusalem streets, Armenian refugees found shelter from genocide. In Haifa's harbor, Jewish ships docked under British flags. Could the land shoulder these burdens without fracturing under the weight of competing hopes? Then came World War I's thunder. Ottoman guns fell silent as British troops advanced through Sinai's sands. In 1917, General Edmund Allenby entered Jerusalem on foot, boots pressing ancient stones as if to honor every footprint that ever trod here. The city's keys were offered to him, yet he refused to wear spurs or ride a horse, acknowledging a covenant older than empires. Could a dignified entrance herald a future of respect between peoples who shared sacred ground? Across the desert, Britain's Balfour Declaration pledged a homeland for the Jewish people, stirring Jewish hearts with echoes of Ezekiel's dry bones vision. I will cause breath to enter you and you shall live. The words promised return amid the dust of war. Yet to Palestinian Arabs the same words felt like betrayal, a promise given on their land without their voice. Could the quill of a distant foreign office shape destinies in Canaan without tearing the tapestry of coexistence? As the Ottoman Empire dissolved, mandates were drawn on maps in London's drawing rooms. Borders carved in ink would guide policy and passports, yet they could not erase the hill's holy memory. Jerusalem was placed under a fragile international guardianship in 1919's League of Nations plans. Gaza and the Galilee fell into administrative districts that ignored ancestral ties. Could colonial borders ever honor covenant's ancient contours? In towns like Nablus and Safed, villagers awoke to new governors and new currencies. Jewish pioneers drained swamps and planted orchards, building the first kibbutzim as moats of return in dusty plains. Palestinian farmers harvested olives in autumn's chill, pressing oil that glowed like molten gold. Each tactic bore the weight of ancestral promise. Could coexistence survive when every grove and field became a stake in a deeper contest over covenant? Tonight the markets hum in Hebrew and Arabic, electronics and hummus stall side by side beneath neon lights. Tourists wander through archaeological parks where ruins of Crusader towers stand beside Roman columns. Bones rising again in stone and story, ashes and breath interwoven across every layer of soil. And beneath the hum of modern life lies an echo that never fades, the voice that spoke to Abraham, that thundered at Sinai, that whispered through exile and return. Could the next chapter be written not in borders drawn by human hands, but in hearts stirred by shared remembrance of promise? As stars emerge above the hills where Abraham's flocks once grazed, the land holds its breath once more. Ancient stones glisten with dew as if tears of memory. And in that silence, one question trembles across the night. Will the promise first spoken under a lone tent under Sinai's sky yet guide the heirs of dust and breath toward a future where covenant unites rather than divides? A pale dawn breaks over a land scarred by war and longing, the Mediterranean silver ribbon glinting beneath clouds of powder blue haze. British troops patrol dusty roads, their khaki uniforms crisp against fields mottled with olive trees and emerging orange groves. In Jaffa's port, waves slap against waiting ships, their holds filled with refugees clutching crumpled suitcases and Torah scrolls whispered over as talismans. Could any quay ever cradle so many hopes and heartbreaks at once? Under the British mandate, Palestine became a crucible of competing dreams. In the 1920s, Jewish pioneers drained marshes and planted vineyards, singing, "If the Lord restores the fortunes of Zion, we will be like those who dream." Psalm 126 verse 1. Kibbutzim rose like mirages in the Jezreel Valley, pillars of sweat and promise on dusty plains. Meanwhile, Arab farmers plowed land their families had tilled for centuries, reciting ancestral prayers beneath the same sun that baked Canaan's hills. Could two peoples rooted in covenant memory ever nourish the same soil without splintering under its weight? By the 1930s, tensions rippled beneath the surface of daily life. Arab leaders decried increasing immigration from Europe, families fleeing pogroms and persecution, arguing that promise had gone too far, staking new claims on old fields. The Arab Revolt of 1936–39 swept through towns and villages like a dry wind, assaulting rail lines and attacking police stations. British troops responded with force, sealing towns under curfew and erecting barbed wire enclaves. Bones rose again in blood and ash. Each skirmish became a fresh fracture in an already splintered mosaic. Could any mandate drafted in distant London ever honor the Covenant's ancient contours? In 1937, the Peel Commission proposed partition, a two-state solution sketched in sterile black ink across irreplaceable fields. Jews welcomed the idea as a step toward sovereignty. Arabs rejected it as betrayal. Promise and dust clashed on every page of the report. Could paper borders truly bind the land when hearts and memories stretched back 4,000 years? World War II thundered across continents, drawing Palestine into its vortex. Jewish paramilitary groups like Haganah and Irgun trained in secrecy, acquiring arms to defend arriving refugees. Palestinian Arabs formed their own militias, determined to resist what they saw as colonial favoritism. In dusty hideouts, commanders whispered tactics beneath olive boughs. Could warfare ever germinate peace? With the war's end came a wave of displaced persons, survivors of Europe's darkest chapter. Ships laden with Holocaust survivors sought entry. British naval patrols intercepted them. Refugees crowded camps in Cyprus, their tongues heavy with grief, but eyes alight with stubborn hope. In every whispered prayer they carried a fragment of covenant's promise, to return to a land that still bore their ancestors' bones. Could comfort ever feel so raw when refuge was so fleeting? The world recoiled from war's horrors and looked to the United Nations for resolution. On November 29, 1947, UN General Assembly Resolution 181 proposed dividing Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international trusteeship. In New York's marble chambers, diplomats argued with abstract numbers, 55% for one, 45% for the other, yet they could not measure ancestral groves or the prayer-worn stones of family tombs. Did they grasp that land was more than coordinates on a map? Jewish leaders accepted the plan amid cautious jubilation. In Tel Aviv, crowds danced beneath electric lights, singing Hatikva, the anthem of longing. Across fields near Haifa, kibbutz members poured champagne onto reclaimed soil. Could this at last be the waking of Ezekiel's dry bones? I will cause breath to enter you and you shall live. Ezekiel 37 verse 5. Their dream felt within reach. Yet Palestinian Arabs saw catastrophe in the same decree. In Ramel and Al-Lida, families packed heirlooms into cloth and fled under fear's shadow. Over 700,000 would become refugees, keys jangling in trembling hands, symbols of homes they might never see again. In tent cities near Amman and Beirut, they cried out Nakba, catastrophe, each generation inheriting loss like a scar. Could promise and dispossession share the same land? On May 14, 1948, the British flag lowered from Jerusalem's citadel. David Ben-Gurion declared Israel's independence on a windswept hill in Tel Aviv. Gunfire cracked across the night. Jewish women wept with joy. Jewish men embraced beneath Old Testament verses. In a single breath, covenant history turned a page. Yet the next dawn brought armies from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, each determined to extinguish the newborn state. Would bones rising again stand firm against the onslaught of armored columns? What followed was a whirl of battles from Galilee's hills to Negev's deserts. In Jerusalem's Old City, Jewish residents held the narrow alleys at the cost of brutal close-quarters fighting. Under the Western Wall, mothers shielded children as artillery shells shook stones older than Solomon. Could the stones themselves cry out, "Where is peace?" as prophets once lamented? By early 1949, armistice lines stabilized. Israel controlled 78% of Mandate Palestine. The West Bank fell to Jordan, Gaza to Egypt. Jerusalem lay divided, its holy sites bisected by barbed wire and patrol roads. The UN Relief and Works Agency began aiding refugees whose tears had salted foreign soil. Could the covenant's promise stretch beyond freshly drawn lines and still cradle hope? In Israel, forests were planted in memory of lost villages, names etched on plaques beneath young pines. Hebrew alphabets resurfaced in schools. The desert bloomed under drip irrigation. Ashes gave way to breath, dust to sprouting green. Yet every grove concealed echoes of orchards uprooted. Could renewal thrive without reckoning with wound? On the West Bank, olive trees passed from father to son beneath Jordanian administration. In Ramallah coffee houses, Palestinian intellectuals debated self-determination, reciting poetry of return as ancient as Canaan itself. Could words alone build a future on fields washed in tears? Jerusalem's divided streets remained a microcosm of conflict. In Israeli sectors, tram tracks carried citizens past the Knesset. In Jordanian sectors, muezzin calls drifted over rubble of synagogues abandoned decades before. Bones rising again seemed a distant echo beneath armored checkpoints. Could the city's soul survive partition's wound? Yet amid division, sparks of shared humanity glimmered. Medical teams crossed no man's land to treat wounded children on both sides. Archaeologists teamed with local villagers to preserve mosaics beneath church floors. Hands once raised in anger laid stones together to rebuild a centuries-old aqueduct. Could covenant's vision find expression in acts of quiet grace? As sun sinks behind the Mount of Olives, the silhouettes of spires, domes, and minarets merge into one skyline. The city breathes with whispered prayers in three tongues. Over centuries, it has borne witness to covenants unfolding and fracture. Yet its stones still pulse with promise. Tonight, the stars above Jerusalem burn as brightly as when Abraham gazed upon them and heard of descendants countless as dust. Between their light and the land below lies the question that echoes through 4 millennia. In the shadow of partition and war, can covenant's ancient voice guide rival heirs back toward a shared future? A scarlet dawn unfurls over the Golan Heights as Israeli paratroopers gaze down upon Damascus's ancient minarets and domes. In 6 swift days in June 1967, Israel seized the Sinai, Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan, territories steeped in covenant's memory and scarred by exile. Jerusalem's old city lay once more under Jewish flag, tears mingling with triumph at the Western Wall. Yet conquest bore a cost. 500,000 Palestinians found themselves beneath a new military rule, their fields and olive groves now threaded by checkpoints and barbed wire. Could a promise of security eclipse a promise of return? In every hilltop settlement sprouted under skyward dreams, homes rose on terraces where farmers once harvested figs and pomegranates. Red-tiled roofs rose atop ancient stones, dividing olive orchards that had fed families for generations. Could the same dust that cradled covenant's footsteps now bear the weight of dividing walls? The first intifada sparked in December 1987 when stone-throwing youths confronted armored vehicles in Gaza's alleyways. Their small fists embodied a larger cry for freedom, bones rising again against iron helmets. Tear gas swirled like incense through refugee camps and urban streets. Mothers threw flour on doorsteps in acts of nonviolent resistance, each plume of white a silent witness to suffering. Could ashes and breath unite into a movement of unyielding hope? Under olive trees in Ramallah's fading light, Palestinian leaders crafted the Declaration of Independence in 1988, invoking 4,000 years of history and prophecy. Yet Israelis heard only mortar shells on kibbutz roofs. Could two narratives of displacement and deliverance ever speak in the same voice? In 1991, the Madrid Conference gathered representatives under white tents at the edges of the desert. Princess Diana's televised tour of Bethlehem's suffering children illuminated the world's conscience. American and Soviet envoys brokered talks as the sun sank behind Judean hills. Could ancient bones buried beneath Gaza's sands ever find life in diplomatic accords? Oslo's secret meetings in Norway's pine forests birthed a spark of hope. In 1993, Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shook hands beneath a tent on the White House lawn. Rabin's words lingered, "Peace has no meaning unless sheltered in security, and security has no meaning without peace." Covenant's promise seemed to pulse anew between dove and olive branch. Could prophecy foretelling swords beaten into plowshares become reality here on these contested hills? Yet the handshake could not silence the gun. In 1995, Rabin fell to an assassin's bullet, and Oslo's fragile flame flickered under the weight of suicide bombings and incitement. Concrete barriers rose in the West Bank, carving new lines through olive groves and villages. Each barrier segment became a stark monument to fear. Could walls ever build trust? In 2000, Camp David's twilight talks ended in silence. The Second Intifada ignited under pulsating clouds of tear gas and explosives. Ambulances wove through shattered streets in Jenin and Ramallah, paramedics cradling wounded children as night closed in. Covenant's promise felt drowned beneath the roar of missiles and the clamor of siege. Could breath return to bones broken by bullets? In 2003, a roadmap for peace was drawn on paper once more. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, uprooting settlers and soldiers alike. Empty houses stood like ghostly altars to vanished dreams. Hamas's rockets swirled across the sky in retaliation, and Israel's Iron Dome rose as a steel testament to survival. Each intercepted missile became a reluctant blessing of technology against the dust of conflict. Could safety ever be measured in fragments of metal? Across the Green Line, the West Bank's checkpoints multiplied. Palestinian Authority checkpoints rose alongside Israeli ones. Palestinians needed permits to pass through their own land. Jerusalem's holy sites remained open yet divided by turnstiles and surveillance. Perhaps no monument to sorrow could match the concrete teeth of separation walls. Could a barrier built to protect ever become a prison? In the heat of 2011, Arab Spring rippled across neighboring states. Palestinians watched from Bethlehem balconies as crowds demanded dignity in Cairo and Damascus. Their own hopes kindled under barbed wire as they chanted dignity, freedom, social justice. Could the winds of change sweep across these hills once more? In recent years, Abraham Accords brought new ties between Israel and Gulf states. Business delegations toasted in Abu Dhabi's sleek towers, their agreements promising innovation and prosperity. Palestinian leaders watched from Ramallah cafes, questioning whether their plight had been sidelined. Could Covenant's promise of universal blessing extend without embracing every child of Abraham? Meanwhile, waves of protests in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan filled Jerusalem's streets with shouts of "Save Sheikh Jarrah." Families clutched eviction orders as foundations trembled beneath bulldozers. Could homes built on promise withstand the tremor of displacement? Yet amid the rubble and rockets, sparks of shared humanity glimmer. Israeli and Palestinian doctors perform joint surgeries in Jerusalem's hospitals, stitching flesh regardless of nationality. Environmentalists from both sides plant olive saplings along the West Bank seam zones, nurturing roots deeper than hatred. Could saplings of hope one day shade children who now grow up under watchful eyes? On university campuses, students debate with fervor and empathy. Professors convene on Zoom calls to share research on water scarcity, cultural heritage, and ancient manuscripts. Covenant's thread of shared history weaves through every lecture. Could knowledge, once a casualty of war, become a bridge beyond fear? Tonight, as stars crown the Judean sky, the hills cradle prayers in three tongues. The air still whispers promises spoken beneath Sinai's flame, carried on the wind that rustles olive leaves. In every heartbeat across these hills, the motifs of promise, dust, return, ashes and breath, bones rising again endure. Could a land shaped by swords yet bound by prophecy ever find its way back to Covenant's unifying vow? As the moon dips below the horizon, a single question rises above the restless night. In a land where promise and pain have danced for 4,000 years, who will dare to pen the next chapter? One where Covenant's ancient voice calls rival heirs to share the breath of life rather than draw lines in the dust? A pale moon glints off the separation barrier's concrete teeth as dawn creeps over the West Bank's terraced hills. Soldiers patrol empty checkpoints before the morning rush, their boots stirring dust motes that hang like silent witnesses. In Gaza's narrow alleys, fishermen launch frail boats into the Mediterranean's blue-gray dawn, nets cast in hope and fear. Could these waters, lapping the same shores where Joshua's warriors once crossed at flood, ever cradle both bread and blessing without stirring new sorrows? In the years since Oslo's fragile promise, the landscape has transformed in both stone and heart. Settlements sprouted like stubborn weeds on hilltops, clusters of red-roofed homes encircled by watchtowers and barbed wire. Each new outpost carved groves into fragments, echoing Genesis 12 verse 7, "To your offspring I will give this land." Yet to Palestinians each settler home loomed as a monument to broken promise, a covenant of return sealed by concrete rather than compassion. Could land shaped by divine word be so subsumed by human ambition that every stone becomes a stake in ownership? Meanwhile, Gaza's skyline rippled with conflict. In 2008, rockets streaked across dusky skies. In 2014, drones thundered beyond minaret domes. In 2021, sirens shattered Ramadan's quiet prayer. Each flare and explosion sent tremors through crowded apartments and dusty refugee camps. Children wrote poetry in UN tents of Rafah, verses scented with mastic and saltaire, echoes of Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, we wept. Could ashes and breath intertwine into future hope when every lull and shelling feels like fragile covenant? The West Bank cities bustle beneath concrete barriers dividing fathers from sons, harvesters from olive trees. In Hebron's stone alleyways, shopkeepers shutter windows at sunset for weekly demonstrations. Yet at dawn, penitent pilgrims drape prayer shawls across the cave of Machpelah's gates, recalling Abraham's burial pact. Could memories older than the oldest walls guide the next footstep toward reconciliation? In Jerusalem, political tides swirl like desert sands. Plans to annex parts of the West Bank resurface in diplomatic chambers. UNESCO debates ancient terraces. United Nations resolutions sigh like desert winds. Faithful from three traditions circle the Temple Mount by day, Jewish pilgrims tracing Hebrew psalms at the Western Wall, Muslim worshippers kneeling on Al-Aqsa's marble, Christian processions winding to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Could Covenant's promise of unity emerge from three interwoven prayers? Amid stalemate, unexpected bridges flicker to life. In recent years, Emirati and Bahraini envoys walked among Israeli markets, signing accords beneath chandeliers and date palms, diplomatic blossoms of the Abraham Accords. Business delegations shared falafel and tea in Ramallah cafes, discussing tech incubators instead of checkpoints. Could the covenant's vision of all nations blessed through you, Genesis 12 verse 3, find fresh breath in these new ties, even as others stand silent at the gates? Grassroots movements press for shared life. Doctors for Humanity treat burn victims from both sides in olive-wood clinics. Water technicians collaborate on aquifer management, drilling wells where Jacob once dreamt of angels ascending. Youth choirs meld oud and violin, their harmonies weaving sorrow and hope into a single refrain. Could music and medicine forge a covenant deeper than any treaty? and yet the shadow of distrust lingers. Elections stall in Ramallah's governorate, coalition talks collapse in Jerusalem's Knesset, Gaza's tunnels lie cloaked in secrecy. Each power struggle echoes ancient debates in Jeremiah's temple. Has this house become a den of robbers? Jeremiah 7 verse 11. Could modern politics learn from prophetic calls to justice that valued mercy over ritual? Throughout, everyday lives press on beneath miracle and menace. Mothers in Bethlehem knead dough for morning matzah, grandfathers in Nazareth recall fishing trips on Galilee's shore, children in Nablus chase kites across olive orchards ringing with laughter. Dust and breath, witness and return, promise and pain continue to intertwine. Could the covenant's silent heartbeat still echo in these simple moments of shared humanity? Beyond borders and barbed wire, diaspora communities in Amman, New York, and London trace lineage to both olive groves and desert tents. Voices on social media debate heritage and hope, algorithms forming virtual walls as real as the ones on the ground. Could a generation raised on screens yet hungry for soil learn to carry covenant's torch across digital divides? As the sun sets on this era, the hills of Canaan glow amber, silhouette of minaret and spire etched against the sky. The land stones, pitted by sword and plowshare, still hum with covenant's ancient refrain. Promise, dust, return, bones rising again, ashes and breath. Could the next chapter be written not in conflict but in shared harvests, where olive trees bear witness to both mourning and joy? In the hush before night fully descends, the hills listen for a voice older than empire, calling rival heirs toward a horizon unmarked by walls. Could it be that covenant's purpose, binding all nations in promise, still awaits its fullest revelation on these sacred slopes? And if the land could speak, what would its stones ask of those who tread upon them, blood and breath interwoven, to bring covenant's ancient vow to life once more? As we've wandered through centuries of promise and dust, from Abraham's lone tent to the shattered stones of modern walls, we see that every act of faith, no matter how small, can reshape history. What began in a desert breeze became altars at Sinai, stones at Gilgal, temples in Jerusalem, and communities rebuilding from exile's ashes. The practical lesson for us today, much like a humble temple rising stone by stone, is this: when we commit to doing great things, whether feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, or lending a hand to a neighbor, God multiplies our smallest offerings into blessings that ripple far beyond ourselves. A single lantern in the dark can guide thousands. One act of kindness can light up a community. So let the story of covenant inspire you to begin your own work of faithful service right now. If this message spoke to your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Then take that first step today, whether it's volunteering at your local temple, donating to a cause, or simply reaching out to someone in need. Your journey of impact starts now. Let's build something great together.